Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rewatch Project with Hannah and Mike. I am Mike, and with me, as always, is Hannah. How are you this evening, Hannah?
Very well. Ready for some B5.
Ready for some B5. So, yes, we are on season 1 of the 1990s science fiction fantasy saga, I've decided, is what I'm going to go with. And, which episode are we talking about tonight, Hannah?
So tonight we're talking about Soul Hunter. It's episode 2 of season 1. Synopsis says, a mysterious alien who steals the souls of the living arrives on the station, putting Delenn's life in danger. It is directed by Jim Johnston and written by JMS.
Yeah, so it was funny when you were saying that, I was thinking of being like, well, it's the second episode of a season, but technically the third episode. And I thought, you know what? Just once, I'm not going to go down that road. You know, we had it with
got Twin Peaks written.
We had it with
all
Twin
over
Peaks.
it.
Yeah. There's a few shows where there is contested.
Farscape. I don't even want to start on the naming of those episodes.
It's all IMDb's fault because you've got the order that TV episodes are shot in, then the episode broadcast dates. And then you've got DVD sets as well sometimes, and it's really, really tricky. And then of course you've got things like apps, things like Kodi and Plex, which will read the episode number, but might give you the IMDb order. So it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing that we're not going to get into, even though I just kind of got into it. So we are on episode 2 of season 1 of Babylon 5. A couple of quick bits of housekeeping before we discuss that, though. Just a reminder that we do appreciate feedback, which you can leave either in the form of comments here on the YouTube channel, if that is how you ingest this podcast, or alternatively, you can email us at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com.
And we have got feedback.
Cool, okay. We also would signpost you towards our friend shows, namely Chistroker versus Punter, his film, her movie, Film Bastards, The Good, the Bad and the Odd, Talk With That Rhythm podcast, and Entertainment Landfill, as well as the other film, television, music, and other assorted pop cultural goodness that cohabits this YouTube channel as well. And also, I would say that if you do listen to this podcast on the traditional podcast feed, that it's worth checking out the YouTube channel. And also, you may not know, because I didn't know until relatively recently, that you can actually watch podcasts on Spotify. So because we do the video versions, technical. So you can actually watch that, or you can just alternatively just opt to download the regular audio version if that is how you choose to live your life. Only other things I would say is Spotify and Apple podcast reviews are also very much appreciated, as are donations via PayPal. But as is always the case, please only contribute if you can without causing yourself any financial hardship.
Okay.
Feedback.
Let's get into it. Okay, so our first bit of feedback, I'll do the YouTube comments that we've had.
Okay.
This is a comment on our pilot episode of Babylon 5.
Okay.
Just a very brief comment saying the studio was a former hot tub factory.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? We talked a little bit about how it was such an incredible feat of making something out of nothing that they would send executives for big budget shows down to visit them to see how they were doing it. And one of the ways they were doing it was by shooting in just a big tin can. That's pretty amazing.
Chaz has been in touch again.
Okay.
I think I'm going to name this Chaz Chats.
Okay.
Because
we don't know that this person's name's Chaz, do we?
No. I
think we
if you haven't watched the previous podcast, we have been getting some really interesting feedback from a YouTube user, CPMF2112, who I have named Chaz.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure what pronouns they use, so I've gone gender neutral.
And if you have a preferred...
By accident. I hadn't realised I had.
If you had a preferred way of being referred to,
let us know.
Let us know. We will defer to you.
Okay. They say it was actually, this is on the episode Midnight on the Firing Line. It was actually originally filmed in 16:9, but due to a budget decision, the CGI was done in 4:3. So it made more sense to go to 4:3 when remastering.
Yeah, it's true, and it's funny. I should point out as well, not to sort of challenge Chaz here. If that could be another
Chaz
slot.
challenges.
Yeah, I was very careful to say that it was originally broadcast in 4:3.
Right.
Because I did know that it was shot in.
No one's besmirching.
No, I know, but it's worth clarifying actually, because it is as pedantic as it sounds, almost like getting into episode number territory. It is quite a big part of the Babylon 5 story, because what they actually did was they did film it in widescreen, which was very rare then. Widescreen TVs weren't even a thing, but JMS wanted to future-proof it. So what that meant was that when they did release it on DVD, they were able to release it in widescreen without actually cutting any of the frame. They just had it all there. But the problem was the special effects were only done in 4:3. So if you had a special effects shot, the edges of the shot wouldn't have effects on them.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? You'd have the live action plate element.
Yeah.
But then the laser beam would end as it got to the end of the 4:3 frame. So what they did what they chose to do, and this wasn't JMS's doing, was, well, we would rather preserve the widescreen frame for just the normal character sitting around talking. But then what we'll do is we'll zoom in on the CG to create the illusion that that's widescreen as well. So that'll fill the frame.
That's why it's pixelated.
That's why it's fuzzy. And it also means that any shot where there's live action and CG elements have a weird effect. Whereas the decision that was made when they did the Blu-ray, which was the correct decision, was we're better off just having it in 4:3 and accepting that we can't have it in widescreen. So everything's consistent and everything is HD. And the other thing was as well, although they did shoot it in widescreen
experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also it was filmed to be shown on 4:3 televisions, because that's what TVs were then. So what you get, you see this a bit with Buffy, because Buffy was shot in widescreen, but was only ever on initial broadcasting 4:3 for regular televisions. So what happens when you watch it in widescreen is you've got these great widescreen shots.
Well, you see the stunt guys on the side.
I mean, there was a weird version that went out by accident where that was the case. But what happens is you get this widescrreen frame, but all the characters are huddled in the middle because they knew that they were going to be shooting it for 4:3.
Yeah.
So I think that
unused space.
What they did was they threw the baby out with the bathwater in order to be able to have just an inch of extra set either side and have it in widescreen. They made the whole thing look like shit. Whereas the decision on the Blu-ray was, let's just accept that it's in 4:3. I mean, it would be great, but the only way that they could do it in widescreen now, they could do it in HD in widescreen and it would look great, but they would have to literally put all of the 4:3 effects on and add effects to the edges of the screen, which would be extremely expensive. And a show like Babylon 5,
very time consuming.
It just wouldn't be practical to do it.
Yeah. They go on to say, from what JMS has said, there was one executive at Warner Brothers, who he wouldn't name, that apparently had some unreasoning hatred of B5 and did everything he could for over 20 years to sabotage the show, stopping them from submitting clips to award shows, blocking syndication requests, stopping any remastering until he finally retired several years ago, which then allowed for those things to go forward.
Well, that was the thing, because for the longest time...
That's kind of amazing that someone can have such a vendetta.
It makes sense, because the show was buried. I mean, it wasn't on streaming. It popped up on Amazon Prime a couple of years ago, which is what the HD remaster was done for. But even then, I think that was only in America. It's not on Prime over here.
Well, just on that point, one of our other users... Winiterly 3173 has said B5 is streaming on Prime and Tubi.
Yeah. I mean, Tubi's free, but Tubi isn't available in most countries. I mean, I know it's not available in England, in the UK, for example. You can get it in New Zealand, but Babylon 5 isn't on it here either. Right. So it's one of those things where
the territory thing.
It has started popping back up again. But, you know, I mentioned before that when Babylon 5 was on TV and for a few years afterwards, it would get mentioned in the same breath as Star Trek. You know, like, I mean, I said that Farscape documentary I've been watching, which was done at the time Farscape came out, they were like, oh, this show's not like Star Trek and Babylon 5. You know, it was that ubiquitous. But the show's legacy, I think, was diminished by it being really weirdly unavailable. And I'll tell you what, I don't know if there's any truth to this story, but it would explain a lot. You know, and I know that
he's saying JMS said it.
Yeah, well, yeah. And JMS himself, he is a bit of a scrapper. He doesn't take shit. So I wouldn't be surprised if he probably, a bit like Gene Roddenberry, I think he was one of those people who pisses off suits, basically. You know, good on him. Babylon 5 feels like a TV
fair enough,
show.
It's his baby,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, exactly. But it's there. It's out there. All the geeks know where it is. And I am glad that it is available in HD now and that people are, you know, doing podcasts about it.
Absolutely. We also have some voicemail from our buddy Mark. And you're about to see the amazing technical skills that I have. Got to hold it up to the microphone.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Hannah. This is Mark. Just calling in for some Babylon 5 stuff.
Babylon 5? That's what you called it.
Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed coming on to talk about Twin Peaks, The Lone Gunman, and the X-Files. Oh, we never did get to talking about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., did we? Never mind. But yeah, that was a real blast. I really enjoyed it, and I hope... let's do it again in 5 years. How about that?
It's probably where we'll be through B5.
Okay, yeah. So I watched Babylon 5 The Gathering. It was the TNT edition. I had no clue what that meant until I listened to your last show about the pilot, and you explained what that was. Yeah, that's the one I watched. Right. Quite enjoyed it. I watched it twice because the first time I was kind of got distracted and it became a second screen experience, which isn't fair. So I was like, what's going on? So I just thought I'd watch it again. And I'm glad I did because I did enjoy it. I really like some of the stuff going on in this. The weaknesses, I think, were there's a couple of the actors were just poor, unfortunately, in this. What's her name? Tamlin Tomita. Now, I like her in Karate Kid 2, and she's also in the Cobra Kai series, which is an awesome series.
She's doing sci-fi
should try it sometime. Cobra Kai is a great series, but if you do, watch Karate Kid 1, 2, and 3. There's your homework. Best homework ever, by the way.
Great.
Because Karate Kid 3 has possibly the greatest moustache twirling villain of all time.
Ponytail twirling,
in the movies,
more like.
But I'll leave that to you. So and I've seen her in other things. She's good, but for some reason she came across as really flat and couldn't act in this, and it was weird because she's good in other stuff. I don't get it, but yeah, that was weak. The Doctor I thought was kind of interesting, but again didn't quite work for me. What I did like was everyone. It was an alien. I thought all of the alien performances were really good. Particularly the lady who was a Minbari. She was excellent, man. She was really good. I like that final scene where she's they kind of where is it the captain? I'm still oriented. The commander sort of says he said an insult. There's a hole in my mind, and her reaction. You know that is a really meaningful thing to her, but she just brushes off. Oh, it's just an insult, you know. And she even says, and he says something like, "You wouldn't lie to me, would you?" He goes, "I'll never tell anything that would be that isn't good for you," or something like that. I.e., she's implying he's hiding something, but it would be bad for him to find out. So that's setting up some sort of long premise, isn't it? Obviously.
Oh, yeah.
I like the guy. I like Londo, was it? The Centauri guy, and he's kind of ranting about the past and how great they were. I'm kind of really curious to find some more backstories, and I'm assuming this is coming down the line, about both the Centauri and the Minbari.
Oh, yeah.
Not really
it sure is.
None at this point, but we'll see.
Don't worry,
I think there's an interesting premise set up here that I kind of like. I will keep watching. The CGI did not bother me in the slightest. It was fine. I mean, you could see it, but I'm used to Blake Seven and Doctor Who, old school Doctor Who and things like that. So this is all fine as far as I'm concerned. The only thing is, it would have been nice if this would have been on film rather than videotape. It's never going to clean up well, is it? I wouldn't have thought, but you never know. But yeah, I kind of like the premise. I'm not in love with any of the human crew at the minute, I have to say. I thought they're all okay. But the aliens, I thought were really good. I did like all of those performances. I think my favourite is probably Londo. Peter Jurassic gives a good performance there. But I can't say, apart from the ones I've already mentioned, that I had any problems with the sort of the crew. It's kind of, I had the same problem with Deep Space Nine in that I thought it was the other people that were more interesting, not necessarily the crew. Now, I've watched enough Deep Space Nine now. I think I'm finished season 4, and I'm about to start season 5. I've watched enough to sort of start liking the crew. Apart from O'Brien, I always liked O'Brien. And now Wolf's in it too, that's good. But, I just like the other characters, Quark and so on.
Hate to tell this, but Wolf
and it
is
strikes me that Londo is kind of Quark in this, but not Quark. I kind of appreciate the differences. I like what's going on in this, so I will be continuing watching. I thought I'd let you know. I'll be watching along with you for the time being. There's nothing in there that's turned me off whatsoever. I'm just looking forward to seeing more. The only thing is I'm going to find it difficult to keep to your pace because I want to raise the head.
Yeah, sorry about
I
that.
also don't want to get ahead of you. I want to sort of watch it as you watch it. So I'm part of the discussion, which means I'll never be listening to your spoiler sections, just so you know. Okay, so that's me. Great choice. And I'm looking forward to investing some time in this over the coming year or whatever it is going to be, 2 years. All right.
It's going to be a couple of years, I reckon. Thank you so much, Mark. Look forward to the next couple of years being B5 related.
Well, and also I'm relieved to hear that basically I think the things that traditionally turn people off about Babylon 5 when they watch the pilot are either done and dusted, or Mark just didn't have a problem with them.
Have a problem.
So I think you'll be fine. I mean, I think that the pilot is, apart from the odd sort of sketchy standalone, I think the pilot's about as rough as it gets. So I think you'll be absolutely fine. And
the two characters you didn't like, well, you will have seen by now that they are not in it.
Yes, they are gone.
So. Yeah,
I mean, the Doctor was
sailing.
The Doctor was interesting. I mean, the Doctor was. I think he was.
I just didn't like the way he spoke.
Well, he found
it really hard.
He ran really hot and cold.
Yeah,
he was either super chill, or it's a little bit like Sisko on Deep Space Nine, where I said before, is that he's either aggressively angry or jubilant. there's like no in between, and the Doctor here is like that. And I think also. This sounds really bad. I think he was too old. I almost feel like you need somebody. I think because the Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy relationship is so ingrained in science fiction that it feels like the Doctor character needs to be more of a contemporary to the lead.
Think, especially knowing what's ahead of the Doctor, he was definitely too old.
Yeah.
And I know, like, they're actually different characters and all of that.
And I do think
that,
it is unfortunate that the two actors... Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Again. I do think that it's unfortunate that the two actors... no, I'm going to stop there. But the two actors who didn't work were the two actors who brought diversity to the cast.
Although we haven't met the Doctor.
Yeah, well, let's... Yeah. But I don't mean to say that had anything to do with it. They were both miscast. I'm not going to say they're bad actors because they're not.
No, they just weren't right for the role.
They weren't right for it. And I think that when you've got an ensemble, a lot of it's about chemistry and it's about finding tone. And I think that what happened in the pilot, I think actors like Mira Furlan, Jerry Doyle, Andreas Katsoulis, and Peter Jurassic kind of became the wayfinders of acting tone in the show.
And they I think people, so strong, aren't they?
Yeah, and well, it's not even just that they're strong; it's that they're. I mean, they are. You're right, but they're of a tone that feels correct with each other,
Oh,
And,
they're each other's contemporaries for sure.
and I think that some of the
There's
other
no
actors...
one sort of picking up the slack.
Yeah, but what I mean, though, is that it's that I'm not even talking quality, I'm just talking style, you know?
Oh, right, okay.
So I think that when you're doing a show, it's difficult to know what the pitch of the performances are going to be. Are they going to be earnest? Are they going to be ironic? Are they going to be detached? Are they going to be engaged, sincere? What, you know? And I think that a few of the actors immediately floated to the surface and immediately became those torchbearers for like, no, this is what the tone of the show's going to be.
Yeah.
And some of the actors weren't along for that.
Yeah.
And also, there was a substantial amount of time between the pilot and the show. So it may just have been that those actors weren't available and would have grown into the roles and been great. They might have just been given bad direction on the pilot, you know?
I think it's quite right that the alien characters are the ones that you like at the moment. You know, in terms of quality, they were the standouts.
Well, they always cast theatre actors. Well, they used to in the 90s at least.
To get through the prosthetics.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you had people like really talented actors on Star Trek, like, you know, Rene Auberjonois, who I remember Jonathan Frakes, who's directed, I think, more episodes of Star Trek than anyone, said that he's the guy who played Odo in Deep Space Nine. He's like, you know, man, he was that show's secret weapon. You know, he's like, I think people don't realise he's like one of the best. He was one of the best working actors in America.
I just remember him from Benson.
Yeah, and you know, and MASH. He was the priest in the movie MASH, wasn't he? You know?
Was he? I've never seen the movie.
Yeah, you wouldn't like it if you.
No,
it's
I know. That's why I haven't watched it.
But anyway, tangents. Yes, thank you for that, Mark. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what you think about that, and from any other listeners who do want to chime in with their stories and experiences at Babylon 5.
I'm officially titling your voicemails as Babbling 5.
Babbling 5. Or Babble On.
Babble On 5.
Yeah. Tell us what you prefer. It's your...
And I want each voicemail to be 5 minutes long. So it's really on the money.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Demanding. All right, we're going to hit pause. Is that it for feedback?
Yes.
Yep, okay.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
We're going to hit pause. We're going to watch Soul Hunter, the second episode, or third, depending of season 1 of Babylon 5. I really keep wanting to say Twin Peaks. I've just got used to not saying Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so go me. Hello and welcome back. We have just finished watching episode 2 of season 1 of Babylon 5, namely the episode Soul Hunter. Now, before we get into a bit of a breakdown and walk through the episode, Hannel. Yes, that's right.
Yes, Michelle.
Hannah, do you have any initial thoughts on this episode upon this rewatch?
I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was a really good mix of nudges towards bigger conversations that are going to happen and also a standalone situation that had a beginning, middle and end.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the little bits of business that Ivanova has with, you know, I'm Russian.
Yes, there are some good bits of business in this episode.
Yeah, the doctor just completely poo-pooing the whole idea of capturing a soul.
Yeah.
That was pretty amazing. It was a good way to explore the crew more, because obviously the movie and the first episode are very heavily targeted towards the aliens within Babylon 5.
Well, it's about the sort of the intergalactic...
well, it's primarily Londo and Jakar.
Yeah, well, it's big picture.
Yeah.
It's the big picture stuff.
So it's nice to get into how, you know, each ambassador relates to the Earthside crew and what the crew has to deal with on a day-to-day running of the Babylon 5 station, and also dealing with the fact that they don't know all the information about the various alien life forms they're going to come across.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're learning at the same time. It's a bit, and if you're going to liken it to Star Trek in any sense, it would be the Scott Bakula Enterprise kind of Star Trek.
Yeah.
In the sense that
they're still new to it.
Yeah, they're new to it. They're finding their feet. They're establishing what is and isn't good for the station and what can affect the alien population of the station versus the humans.
The station population.
The station population. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I did want to call him the asshole hunter the whole time. Just
slightly sphinctery head.
Well, yeah, and it's all a bit sort of genital focused on top of his head.
Well, if you're going to go kind of like somewhat anthropomorphic, there's only so many body parts that you can move around, really.
What actually gets me is he's a bit of a dick, and he's also slightly cross-eyed. So there's a lot of times where he's, meditating or whatever, and he's a bit at the camera.
I didn't notice that.
And I got quite distracted, but in a good way.
Well, as somebody who's had a lazy eye, as a member of the lazy eye community, Hannah, and I am looking at you when I say this, just so you know, I take great offence by it.
I say it in jest.
That makes it even worse. So you're mocking the...
I mock you on the daily.
Oh, right. Okay. You noticed that flinch? You saw the flinch? There was no flinch. There was a flinch.
What did you think?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think this was a really interesting episode. So, I mean, it's the third episode of the show, and it's the third episode written by J. Michael Straczynski. So, immediately that separates this out from Star Trek, because, all the Star Trek shows, obviously, the most obvious one being the original Gene Roddenberry show, they all had showrunners, but we're 3 for 3, So what you're seeing here is a universe. You're seeing a writer, a creative person who's obviously got, a vision and a story Bible and, probably these, histories of all the different races, getting to explore that. And this episode does it more. But I think
it's very, very J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah. I mean,
knowing all the backstory of all the different races.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting here is that it's a little bit like the X-Files, because you hear this a lot with TV shows where you get the pilot episode and then you get the first episode of the regular show, and usually they're big idea episodes. So if you look at the X-Files, and the X-Files was the same, they did the pilot and then there was a bit of a gap and then they started the show. And both the pilot and the first regular episode were very much about the mythology, in the X-Files. They were very much about the alien conspiracy. But it wasn't really until the third episode, which was the first standalone, and there's a case for saying that this is the first standalone. I think it's a bit more complex than that, and we'll get into it when we talk about it, and probably more so in spoilers. But there's this interview I always remember with Chris Carter, the creator of the X-Files, and he said that he feels that they didn't really sell the show to the network until that third episode, because they were like, well, we like these first 2 episodes, but what's the show going to be? On a weekly basis, what's it going to be? And then when they saw Squeeze, the episode with Toombs, the first monster of the week, they were like, oh, right, okay, we got it now.
Yeah.
And it feels like this episode was this is what the show's going to be episode. Now, it's complicated because the show will change. But I think that it's really important to remember that when this was made, the only TV shows that had ongoing storylines were soap operas.
Yeah.
Was your Dallas and your Dynasty and those sort of shows. And JMS knew he had this 5-year storyline, but he kind of had to sneak that by with stealth. He basically had to say the best he could get was the conventional thing at the time then was every episode was a standalone. You could maybe have little, mainly character things carry over, and you'd get to do maybe a couple of 2-parters. So I think what he sold them on, which was kind of bullshit, really, was it'll all be standalones, but we'll have the odd 2-parter that will move it forward. And I think that this episode's a great example of the way he snuck it through, because on the surface, this does seem like a standalone. You've got an alien guest character of the week who comes in, who
has a purpose.
Does a bunch of stuff, leaves, and it seems, for the most part, like the status quo is restored at the end of the episode, and everything's fine. The status is quo again, and everything is fine. Now, the two things that go against that are, this is a new universe, so every single piece of new information you're given is building to the mythology of the show. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the original Star Trek in the 60s, they were all standalones, but there was one episode where it was the first time the Klingons were in it.
Yeah.
So that added, although the show was standalones, that added to the tapestry of the show and the universe. So what we see in this episode...
It's a lot of world building.
Exactly. Is that inevitably there's going to be world building because they're introducing new races. They're solidifying our understanding of the current ones and of the characters.
And quite rightly, the viewers are getting used to all those intricacies.
And with TV shows back in the 90s, because, there wasn't even really TiVo, and there certainly wasn't streaming and DVD box sets or anything like that. They kind of had to tell you the same stuff over and over again because they couldn't assume that you were able to even see every episode. So they had to kind of keep reinforcing things. So there's that. And then the other thing is, and obviously I won't go into any specifics here because we'll have the spoiler section at the end of the show. But Hannah and I, and any audience members who've seen this show before, know that actually they foreshadowed quite a lot of stuff in this episode. Yeah, but you would not know that at the time. So that's interesting as well, I think.
Yeah, very much so.
So we open up with, I like the fact that a lot of the Earth Force or spaceships, I'm not even sure where they're meant to come from, are named after science fiction authors. Like there's the Starliner Asimov, which is a nice touch.
I like the fact with their jump gate that the whole idea is that that you're supposed to schedule your arrival a bit like, planes landing on a runway.
And they have to buy, you've heard in the last episode, that you have to buy jump gate credits.
Yeah.
And that there's a black market for them. And that it was in the same way that the introduction of steam opened up the West to America, that really it was the introduction of jump gate technology that essentially made interstellar travel possible.
Yeah.
Because of the great distances.
It's just quite a nice detail that people aren't just hyperdriving or warping.
Well, it's kind of believable because there's certain things, like, for example, the fact that the station rotates. There's no artificial gravity like in Star Trek, where they've just got this magic button.
And actually you see that when Sinclair's out and retrieving the ship, it's a mechanical arm that he's trying to grab onto the ship with, and he's using the thrusters to change the rotation.
Well, he has to match the rotation of the ship and the station, which is really makes a lot of sense and would be really bloody difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I don't go for super realism, but it is quite a nice little detail. And I think solidifies that feeling that this could be near future.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, also we see an underclass on the station as well. We see, down below they call it, where you've got people who, probably went to the station, like
the Titanic.
Well, yeah, but also, I mean, like Hollywood.
Yeah.
People go with dreams and they don't always work out.
Do you have a dream?
And they end up in the shit, basically. And again, it's one of those things
they
where...
end up being Pretty Woman.
Yeah. Well, a pretty skanky woman. And the thing that I like about it in Babylon 5 is, although it isn't this utopian future that is like a Star Trek, the show itself, it's not depressing. It's there. But ultimately, it's still a hopeful, forward-thinking place based around idealism. But it's just... the problems of Earth have gone with it. We're also introduced to, I guess one of the other things about this episode is that we're introduced to Dr. Franklin, played by Richard Biggs. And man, he's a big upgrade, isn't he?
He's fantastic.
Immediately, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, you're better. Oh, well, actually, no, again, not better. You're a better fit.
You're suitable.
Yes.
Yeah, you are a better fit.
Yeah.
Very
it just
so.
Effortlessly falls into the sort of tempo of the show.
And does give me... I think gave me the biggest chuckle with the whole, Yeah, that's just not possible.
Yeah. And then he's like, I understand this, but souls? He's like, he's like, whoo. Like, come on, mate. I think, so we get a very traditional TV kind of bumper where it ends with the ship on a collision course. One thing that's never occurred to me before is on the narration on the opening credits, how important I think it is to note that it's being delivered retrospectively. Like he says, this was the last of the Babylon stations. The year was. So what that does is, and this is another one of the Tolkien elements, and there's some other, we're starting to see Tolkien creeping in a little bit here, and I'll get to that a bit later, but it's a feeling that this has all already happened, that it's historical, that we're being told this story of this thing that has already happened.
It's almost like a time capsule, isn't it? It
is, but it adds to the mythological element to it. You can almost see the pages being turned, Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction. I love that, again, we get Sinclair being a man of action. Like, of course, it's him that has to go out with he's walking down and like his guys passing him his space helmet. And he's like, I'm going to, like, he doesn't get some lackey to do it. He goes out there and goes like full Biggles. And, but immediately. Babylon Biggles. But Delenn has an immediate reaction to the Soul Hunter as well. And of course, we're not sure about Delenn because on the one hand, she's this groovy kind of hippie, sand garden, sympathetic person. But she is also a figure of mystery. As well, so we're not sure.
Well, there's that side of her that abstains from votes and things where you would expect her to have a voice and stand up for what's right, which kind of muddies the water a little bit, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I think because it's still quite fresh in my mind, it's a little bit like, you often get characters like this, particularly in the 90s. I think of like Skinner in the X-Files, particularly those first few seasons where you're
on the fence about who he's sort of for,
but you want them to be good guys.
You do,
and I think that's the case with Delenn, is the fact that you're kind of. I remember watching this for the first time. Even watching it now, you're kind of willing her to be on the right side because she's just such a great character. You kind of want her to be,
Yeah.
And this idea of them being a mysterious race, and I liken it a little bit to all the stuff in the pilot episode about the Vorlons and about this idea of them being ancient and existing outside of science. We are starting to see these fantastical elements that you really, outside of, I think the only exception I can think of is things like the prophets and the Par-Wraiths in Deep Space Nine. It's a fantastical element that you really don't get in Star Trek because you get the idea that you've got all the spaceships, you've got all the alien races, you've got all this kind of like stuff that to us seems fantastical. But you almost get the feeling in the Babylon 5 universe that magic exists as well.
Yeah.
And you never get that feeling in Star Trek. Everything in Star Trek is very scientific ultimately.
Yeah, not everything. There is 100% fantasy elements in Babylon 5. And you're right, it is a bit of magic. There's a lot of mystical faith.
Yeah, it's this idea that...
that even just the talk of souls and it being captured or celebrated or,
And when they talked about the Vorlons, they were like, only one human saw the Vorlon and they say he turned to stone, like Medusa, these kind of, And it's this idea that I think that the show is cosmetically science fiction in the way that Lord of the Rings was cosmetically medieval.
Yeah,
it was like a medieval, like a kind of like Beowulf or one of those kind of stories, but with this fantastical thing on it. I feel like Babylon 5 is doing the same thing, but instead of taking this kind of medieval, war epic from narrative fiction history, Babylon 5 is using space opera as the foundation to tell this fantasy story.
Yeah, very much so.
And I think that, again...
And that is the way you should go into it.
Yeah, and I mean, I know obviously we're bringing our wider knowledge of the show to bear here, but I think
it's evident at this stage that it's not just about facts and figures and what's testable and provable.
Well, it's an interesting way of looking at it as well, because this idea that, you know, if we've gone to space and we've got jump gates and we understand xenobiology and all of these sort of things, that we've kind of got it all figured out. The show's kind of telling us that no, there's more to it. You know, you think you're all that, but you ain't, basically, just to bring in the Jeremy Kyle a little bit there. Yeah, so we get a sense of the underbelly of the station as well, that there's, you know, this poorer class, which is a very, un-Star Trek kind of thing. We see a freaky moment, in case you're wondering, when he's standing up behind the Doctor, the Soul Hunter. And it's worth mentioning that the Soul Hunter's played by this actor called William Morgan Shepherd, I think his name is. And he's a great genre actor, very big, booming kind of. He reminds me a lot of the actor who plays the one-armed man in Twin Peaks. He's got a very similar kind of cadence to his voice. He's done Doctor Who. He's done a load of shows, but also his son Mark Shepherd is a great genre actor now. He's been like in Firefly. He's done Doctor Who as well. He's in Supernatural. Mark's beloved Supernatural. So it's great to see that science fiction acting dynasty represented here. I also love the Sito, Richo, Mantare.
Yeah.
And just the way he kind of like will stop and talk for a bit, and then the conversation will end, and then he'll be like, Sito. And you can almost see Franklin like, oh, he's off again. You know, once he's on his Sito, Rito business.
The first time we watched that, I remember that getting stuck in my head for days.
But we learned that they're drawn to death. And again, this is a fantastical thing. This doesn't necessarily feel like a science fiction idea as much as a fantasy idea. And I love how prosaic JMS's dialogue is. Like when he talks about, when the Soul Hunter's talking about the special people, like he says, what is it, like the leaders, the gifted, the important, but the blessed lunatics as well. The idea of putting lunatics on the same level of just thinking as these people. We get mentions of Dukat, as well. So we're starting to see more about the Minbari, because what's also
fleshing out the Minbari structure.
Yes, yeah, and it's worth mentioning as well that there's no Londo or Jakar in this episode at all. So the other thing that we're seeing is that the cast of this show is big enough that you can neglect certain characters from it and, you know, just spend a bit of time over here. So we learned that the Minbaris basically created not a human shield, a Minbari shield around their leader to prevent him having his soul taken. But the implication here is, and this is a little bit like Star Trek actually in a weird way, because they've got the whole thing with the Vulcans and their souls, is what the Soul Hunter's saying is that he's preserving them. Yeah. That he's preventing them from going into oblivion and being able to maintain their spirit.
It just reminds me that I'd be terrible on a jury, because to start with, I think
he's all right.
Yeah, I did think, oh wow, he's just preserving souls.
Yeah,
and then Delenn saying, "Kill him," and I'm thinking, yeah, kill him. And then someone else, no, he's just doing his thing. You know, it's all bullshit.
But then it turns out that he's actually murdering them. And
I know. But I feel like I'd either put someone in jail for life who was innocent, or let a murderer go. Like, it just depends who's got the more persuasive argument.
Well, hopefully the New Zealand judicial system will see this.
Hit me up.
And you'll never have to do jury duty.
Considering the amount of true crime I watch, you'd think I'd be pretty good at...
No, but those true crime documentaries mess you up as well, because they like to take you down a certain path and then are like, but yeah, you know, he then killed everyone, you know, and yeah, they do that. I do like the space burial sequence. I like how Franklin seems surprised that Ivanova is doing that. Like she sort of goes all, deferential. And he's like, oh, yeah, okay, gosh, we're doing this. And, she talks about how you could live for 200 years and you'd still be human, you'd still make the mistakes. And he's like, oh, you're a pessimist,
No,
yeah, she's like, we know about these things. So Delenn speaks to the soul hunter and he talks about the souls being like his children. He has this paternal sense over them. And she wants to know if any of them are Minbari. And he talks about how he can save them. And
the way he talks about how he listens and learns and da-da-da, he makes it sound like they have, they're pleased that they've been captured.
Where I think it's really interesting for two reasons. One, because it really adds to the mythology of Babylon 5 and is something that will, come back up again. I don't think that's a huge spoiler to say. But also, it really starts to directly connect it to Tolkien, is when Delenn and the Soul Hunter have this argument where he's like, look, if I don't do this, they're just going to die and they'll be lost forever. And Delenn's like, no, they're reborn into next generation of Minbari. And because you've been stealing them, that isn't happening. And we're becoming diminished. Now, diminished is a term that was used for the elves.
The elves, yeah.
This idea that the light in their trees was going out and they are becoming diminished. So what we're seeing here is JMS.
And they're very much stronger as a collective.
Exactly. So we're seeing JMS make a very direct connection between the Minbari and the elves from Tolkien, and even using the same terminology. And that's something that we'll see later on, is place names and character names from Tolkien will start to creep in to Babylon 5 as well, So he's not trying to hide that stuff.
No.
He's sort of celebrating it.
Yeah.
And we learn about her being a Satai, which is an honorific for a member of their leading Grey Council.
Yeah. And at this stage, you no idea what that is or means. Or
and again, to me, I remember first seeing this, I think of like the Council of Elrond. It all feels very much in the same way that in Star Trek, alien races were often shorthands for either different societies or historical eras on Earth or different traits. So, for example, you've got the Ferengi who represent capitalism, but then you've also got, the Klingons who were meant to represent Russia, and what I think we've got here is a lot of JMS's influences are literary.
Yeah.
So really, it's the Minbari are meant to represent elves, essentially. So, and I think that, why not? If you're going to take from history, is it too much of a leap? But so I think what we're seeing here in many ways is, when you see the Soul Hunter say to Delenn, what are you doing here playing ambassador? What we're seeing here is this is actually a stealth mythology episode of the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
It looks and sounds like a standalone, but really we are getting a lot of pretty important information.
And actually, to go back to, previous things we've watched, that's very like X-Files. Thinking that something is just very much a throwaway standalone episode and then something quite big.
And Buffy would do that a lot as well. And I think Babylon 5 was an important stepping stone in that progress, because what shows that I think really adopted the structure of Babylon 5 are shows like Fringe, I think, where they start off as standalones but slowly morph into being largely story. I mean, Deep Space Nine did this as well. The X-Files did this. A lot of shows do it. Where
Fringe and Babylon 5, though, are prime examples of a show that you could really watch one and sort of get a conclusion at the end of it.
Yeah.
But then the series morphs so much that if you miss an episode, you're in the dark about what's happening.
And I think also it makes sense for Babylon 5's first season to have standalones, because you're trying to grow your audience. What would happen in the 90s and before is you kind of stumbled across shows. Like you would literally be channel hopping.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh, what's this? I mean, I watched that 2-part documentary series on Netflix a few weeks ago about the Jerry Springer show. And, you know, when that started off, it was just a really bland daytime talk show. You know, there were hundreds of them, like, you know, Oprah, Sally Jessy, Raphael, all these ones. And a new producer came on and they did an episode with the Ku Klux Klan. And it just kicked off. And that was when they were like, okay, we get ratings when there's fighting, basically. And they got this new producer, and the producer said, look, I want these episodes, I want every episode of this show to be something that's intriguing, even if you've got the sound off. He's like, if somebody's channel hopping and they don't have the sound on, I want them to stop and go, what was that? And that was how you found TV shows back then. You know, you would literally be like, oh, this is interesting. So I think that what they tried to do with the first season was have enough of a low price of admission for new audience members that you could find the show. But there does come a point, like there would with Fringe and a lot of later shows, where they're like, right, you know what? I think everybody who's going to get aboard is aboard now. So let's just go.
Let's go for it. Yeah. We blew our daughter's mind the other day about having to run to the loo in the ad breaks for TV shows and stuff,
Yeah.
About how you can't pause it and you just have to watch what was scheduled to be on. You couldn't choose.
Oh, I remember when we took our kids on holiday.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, I want to watch SpongeBob. I'm like, well, you can't. Like, what do you mean? We got a TV. Yeah, but it's not on. And they're like, what do you mean not on? Like, stupid.
It's not a smart TV, dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, we turned the TV on and, you know, SpongeBob was on.
Yeah.
They're like, right.
The lesson.
Yep, there you go. Never trust your dad, I think was the lesson. I couldn't help but think of the Shankara stones from Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
When we saw the soul globes, I'm going to call them.
The arseholes.
I love that they managed to bust out the praying mantis prop again after the pilot. And also that prop was used in Buffy. Do you remember the praying mantis woman in season 1?
Yeah.
Another Warner Brothers show. So obviously there's a giant praying mantis just gathering dust somewhere on the Warner Brothers backlot. That's.
I wonder if it's the same one that was used in the movie 9 Months.
Was there a giant praying mantis in the movie?
Yeah, Hugh Grant has a bad dream.
Oh, okay.
That his girlfriend's going to eat him like a praying mantis.
Was it a Warner Brothers movie?
Oh, probably. I'll have to do.
I wonder if that praying mantis has got its own IMDb page with like all of the.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, funny.
Yeah. So you may remember me from such appearances. I've got this no Jakar and Londo note here as well. So basically, what we've learned is that he's a very proactive soul hunter. You know, and he basically crumbled under workplace pressure because he wasn't meeting his KPIs, and he decided that he was going to cook the books a little bit and start murdering people.
I kind of like that. He looks different. Like he looks a lot different to the one that comes to find him, and you notice that he has quite a few cracks through his skull. And I wondered if that was like a nod to like stress fractures or something, like a nod to being under stress and having a bit of a mental health crisis.
And I will say, the makeup effects on the show are great.
Yeah.
You know, and it's funny as well, like he's got that thing around his head, and it's a bit like the thing Quark did. And you'll notice a lot of aliens in 90s shows would have those because it just takes so long to get them into those things and then merge them with the makeup.
Yeah.
That they're like, just put some alien thing on him. And the thing was, I buy it because I'm just like, well, that's probably part of their culture in the same way that we wear ties, and it enriches it, you know. So I think, again, sometimes...
They've got really big heads.
Well, yeah, it's like necessity is the mother of inventions and creativity sometimes. And I think that this is
you know, it always goes back to Jaws, doesn't it?
Yeah, barrels in the water. I also think the Soul Machine looks pretty cool as well in a sort of cyberpunk kind of way. And the idea of capturing them in glass balls makes, well, not...
It was quite sort of phantasm.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. And again, we get a little bit of foreshadowing, or what feels like foreshadowing, when he's saying to Delenn, "Oh, you would do such a thing," you know. And
when he gets a glimpse at her soul.
Yes. And he says to Sinclair, you know, they're using you. I also like the fact that this is the episode where we get the "it can be a dangerous place" shot of him walking around the corner with his gun, with just looking cool. So the Shankara stones attack
immediately lamped in the face by Mr. Soul Hunter.
Well, it's a dangerous place, Hannah. I mean, you know, that's how we learn. Like when he was narrating the opening credits, he's like, "Oh, it's a dangerous place. I got lamped right after by this big arsehead guy." Episodes like this, where you've got this fun little standalone adventure, where there's an opportunity to drop in a bit of world building and a bit of foreshadowing. It just reminds me again the incredible restraint that JMS had, carrying all this story around in his back pocket and passing it out, and knowing that he could just blow minds. But, you know, like a phrase that you hear a lot in Babylon 5 that characters say is, "when the time is right," like you will know when the time is right. And I feel like that was a mantra for the show, that JMS was like, "No, I'll use this when the time is right," you know. And even though the show was on the precipice of cancellation for like its whole 5 years, he still had the trust. You know, it's like keeping your eyes forward when you're walking the tightrope and not looking down.
Yeah.
You know, he's...
Well, he obviously believed in what he was creating.
Well, I think he would rather have had the show fail on his terms and not be completed, but go for it in the hope that it would be.
Yeah.
You know, and not second guess. Delenn tells Sinclair that we were right about you. And I love the fact that it's almost like Sinclair understands TV shows, because the doctor's like, "Look, let her get a rest. You can carry on the conversation afterwards." And he's like, "Yeah, fine, but I'll bet you half a year's pay that she does not finish that sentence." You know, it's like he knows and we know that the mystery will be preserved until, you know... Yeah,
that's far too juicy to be out in episode
It'll
3.
be in a 2-parter, won't it? He does a keyword search for satay, which is a delicious sauce for chicken. Satay. Is it?
I've never made you a chicken satay.
Yeah. Also, another thing about Babylon 5 is there's always more to the episodes than I expect. Like, in nearly every episode, maybe this is a talking thing, there'll be a scene where I think that's the end, and then it'll go back. And I think what it is I've been so programmed by Star Trek to think that you've got the main plot is solved, and then there's them sitting around on the bridge going, "Well, that was mad, wasn't it?" You know, having a bit of a joke. You know? Yeah. God, yeah.
Shit got real.
Yeah. It's just always nuts around here, isn't it? And then it'll end. Whereas, like with Babylon 5, you'll get that, but then you'll get some more stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting watching this as a programmed Star Trek fan. And that muscle memory, but just the show not doing that, I think is really interesting, and I really noticed that. And then we finish up with Delenn freeing the souls that were captured. So before we say goodbye to people who are watching Babylon 5 for the first time and get into our very carefully signposted spoiler section, any final thoughts on this episode?
Just a thoroughly enjoyable episode, plenty to get your head around, and a lot of, like we said before, world building going on, and a thoroughly good watch.
Gets the job done. I agree completely. For those of you who are not sticking around, quick reminder that we do appreciate feedback, which you can leave here as comments on the YouTube channel, or alternatively, you can email us at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Please do give us positive reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Donations via PayPal, also very much appreciated, but please do not do so if doing so would cause you any financial hardship. And also check out our friends' shows and likes and subscribes on YouTube are really helpful because that drives more people towards the podcast, which results in more conversation, which is ultimately a great motivator for doing these with a greater level.
And our kids think we're really cool when we get more subscribers.
Well, yeah, that's the primary motivator ultimately in our lives, isn't it? So what are we talking about next time, Anna?
Okay, the next episode is called Born to the Purple. Synopsis says, Londo falls for a beautiful slave whose owner wants to steal sensitive information. Garibaldi discovers that someone is using a restricted communications channel. It is directed by Bruce Seth Green and written by JMS and Larry DiTillio. It's written by Larry DiTillio and story edited.
So not written by J. Michael Straczynski.
He's just got a creator credit on this one. One
of the few episodes that isn't. We will see you again very soon to talk about that. However, if you have seen Babylon 5 before, join us after this short break where we will get into some spoilers. So goodbye, or see you in a moment, depending on which of those groups you fall into. And we're back. So I've got a couple of things, Hannah, but is there anything you want to mention that is spoilerific?
Simply, it's Valen.
Well, obviously, yes. He's still Valen.
I love that they're starting to hint so early on towards the fact that, there's something different about Sinclair, and he has a connection to the Minbari. In an episode that's about their souls being reborn. Yeah, as very well. Much so. It's kind of all there. Yeah, it is. It is. And I can't remember how early on I said to you when we first watched this what my predictions were about things. I know exactly when it was. Oh. And I'll tell you when we get there. Oh, right, okay. It's just really lovely to see that JMS had such a direction with it. It's not throwing the track in front of the train kind of writing. It's very thoughtful. And it's not even great on a sense of it just being smart ass. It just means that he can tell the story properly and well. It's not about getting one over on the audience or acrobatics. And I know that's one thing I really appreciate about him is it's smart writing. Nothing seems to be dumbed down, but equally it's not complicated for complication's sake. Yeah, it's not like, oh, look at my quill. Yeah. Look how the ink drips off. He really wants his audience to enjoy it. And if you're into it, you will. I mean, good storytelling ultimately is an act of communication, and good storytellers are ultimately good communicators. And I think that that's what you see here. I mean, the other thing as well is I almost wonder if Delenn thinks that one of the souls is Valen. Yes, I wondered that too. Because we know that her relationship with the soul of Valen and how that connects with Sinclair, who is Valen, incidentally. Glory, a.k.a. Ben, is... I really thought a moth was going to fly into my mouth while I was talking to it on camera. I was just thinking, I know that would make your frigging year, Hannah. If that happened. Really would. You'd be like, could you just make a GIF of that, please, Mike, so I can see it whenever I want? Yeah. Just a loop of me going. I really wish that you had a video of you throwing that handful of peanuts and pistachios into your mouth that I mixed up in your lunchbox one day. Yes, my work colleague was convinced that you were trying to murder me by spiking my chewable peanuts with some hard-shelled ones and a bit of broken glass. The last bit's not. There was no broken glass in the end. No, not intentionally. But there was pistachios in their shell.
Mixed in with regular peanuts as well. But just a couple. She didn't want me to spot them. She painted them to look like regular ones. And was eating regular nuts to get me in the mood. Like, oh, Mike, are these regular nuts? Because these taste like something special.
I could just see how wrong that was all going to go.
As my teeth shatter and I choke on shards of broken bloody shell. But yeah, so it's. I mean, the big spoiler element, I think, in this episode really is all of the secrecy around what's going on with Sinclair. The fact that Delenn is basically slumming it there just to keep an eye on him to make sure that the prophecy, and that she's got already, what we don't know is that she already has a relationship with Kosh.
Yes.
So there's that. But yeah, so it's interesting as well that they do mention Dr. Kyle briefly. But we get a bit more information about him because what we learn is that he was actually really called back because he saw Kosh and was considered a security risk. And so did the first officer.
Security.
Yeah. So she got called back for that reason as well. But I think it is interesting that we are getting it's funny because all of the soul stuff in this episode, and this shows you what a crafty storyteller JMS is and how he was sneaking out these stealth mythology episodes, making them look, they walk and talk like standalones, but they're not, is he got across to us that Minbari's believe in the reincarnation of souls. He got in stuff about Dukat. All of this information, which is going to be absolutely crucial, and
the Grey Council.
The Grey Council, but he made it sound like it was just flavouring and colouring, like in the same way that in Deep Space Nine, the Bajorans have got all of this spiritual hippy dippy stuff that they're into. It feels when you first watch it like he's just fleshing out the societal mythology of the Minbari a little bit, where he's actually giving you crucial story information, which will be really important further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else?
But no, I think spoiler-wise, it was very much all about Sinclair's role within the Minbari.
Yes, absolutely. But again, you would not get that at all, probably. No. The first time you watched it. So,
I mean, I think it's fairly obviously signposted that there's something there, but unless you know what it is, it's kind of just alluding to that maybe when the Soul Hunter says they're using you, you don't think. Like, your first thought isn't, oh, he's got Minbari DNA or whatever it is. You think maybe it's a more political thing that perhaps in a way they're going to use him
strategically.
To conquer
politics,
more worlds.
Yeah.
You can't rule that out at this stage.
But what you do get from this episode is that we know from the pilot that there's this mystery around why the war was ended.
Why the war stopped.
We know that Sinclair, at least the show's making us feel like Sinclair's connected to that because he's got that blackout or knows something. And now that we're directly tying Delenn to that conspiracy.
To knowing what's going on.
I mean, when I first saw it, I just assumed that he had seen something that he wasn't supposed to see and had some secret bit of information, and that they'd wiped his memory so it wouldn't get out, and that they were keeping an eye on him just to make sure that he didn't remember and blag. And there's elements of that are correct, but that's not really it. But that's what I think most audience members would be thinking at this point, unless they're you, who just has this weird ability to figure out stories like months in advance.
How far in was it?
It was during season 1. It was during an episode called "And the Sky Full of Stars," which is about the 6th or 7th episode.
Yeah.
It's the next episode that
predicted that Sinclair was Valen.
Yeah. And I just poker faced my way through that. It's uncanny.
It's funny.
All right, so that's us. I think we're done, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we will be back very soon to talk about the next episode, Born to the Purple, episode number 3 of season 1 of Babylon 5. But yeah, we'll see you then. Goodbye.
Take care.